Mr. Waris Husein.
Thank you so much for being here, please.
I was the youngest director at the BBC. I had just done a trainee course. I was anxious to prove my skills, and they were putting me on I did a daytime soap, which used to go out twice a week, and one of the episodes used to go out live. And I thought, this is my fate. Then what happened was that Sidney Newman, who was then head of drama, wanted to do something new. He wanted to do a series that would be for kids, but they wouldn't patronize the kids. He wanted something that would educate them. So the format would be a story that would take people into the future and then also into the past, so that you could have a future situation in scientific sci-fi, and then you could also educate them with stories that took place in history. And that format still exists, as you probably see. But Sidney then decided how he was going to put this thing together, and he came up with the idea of Doctor Who. And at that time, they were looking for a director, and who was the most vulnerable, anxious, ambitious one around, hiding in the wings? They chose me because there was no one else to object. The reality was, how do you do a show about an old man? At that time, Doctor Who was William Hartnell, if you all remember, who lives in a telephone box which becomes a spaceship. It seemed like a ridiculous idea to the heads at the BBC. It was very bureaucratic at the time. A lot of people objected to it, and they almost killed the idea. And if it hadn't been for Sidney Newman, who I want to mention yet again, because he's never remembered, and he should be on credits by now, he was the originator. He chose a young PA who he used to work with at commercial television called Verity Lambert. And so the two youngest people that the BBC could come up with were shown into a little room with a table and 2 chairs and 4 scripts. And they were told, we are going to have to move this along. I looked at the first 4 scripts, and they were about guys who walked around in furs looking for fire, and there was no dialogue. And I said, what are we going to do with this, Verity? And she said, we're going to have to make it work. And I said, oh my God, I thought I was going to go, I was looking forward to doing Shakespeare. And so what happens is that we did try to make it work, and I think we more or less set the tone. It was quite difficult. We had no money. That's something else I must tell you about. Because the BBC did not believe in the show, we were shoved off into the oldest studio down the road. We were given the oldest equipment for the cameras. In fact, the cameras were so heavy that the camera boys got back trouble just trundling from one situation to another. And that was because no one believed in it, and we had to make it work. So it gives me even more pleasure to be able to tell you this story now. We couldn't have started under worse auspices, because you may or may not know this. The opening, the first night when it was supposed to be broadcast, was the very night on which President Kennedy was assassinated. So you can imagine the horror and the gloom, and my God, what are we going to do? And so the BBC then did actually bring it out again, but we thought, oh, this is terrible. It's like a terrible sign.
You've done 2 pilots because you shot a first version of An Unearthly Child. They looked at it, and what happened? You get the first one, you present it, and
the first I don't know how many of you have seen the pilot. I wish no one had seen it, and because quite frankly, it's a work in progress, and we were terribly upset by it. In fact, Sidney took Verity and me out to dinner. And he said, I should by rights be firing both of you. And I said, what can we do? And I said, well, Sydney, you know, in those days, it wasn't as simple as it is today. We were using we were shooting on tape with 4 cameras, and you cannot stop the tapes. And those, you were rationed to 4 breaks per episode. And one of the breaks involved, how do you get somebody into a phone box and then into another big set? And we fudged it. It didn't work. And William Hartnell, who was quite a character, by the way, that's another thing we should talk about, which is the way the Doctor Who has developed to Matt Smith. I mean, you now have got this very young guy. Well, we had David Tennant, of course, but originally he was an old man. Who's supposed to be so many years old, and he had a granddaughter. Now, of course, he's got glamorous companions. And I often wonder what happened to his granddaughter. Somebody should mention it. There's another funny story, because, again, casting in it was even more hysterical, because the furs we put on everybody, the actresses were okay. Well, none of them were okay, because there were fleas in the fur. And there were a lot of scratching went on, and I had to audition actors by saying, are you hairy? Because we couldn't afford... It was all very embarrassing, and would you just take your shirt off? Anyway, I'm still astonished. I'm sitting here, I'm watching all of you watching me, and I never for a minute thought this would ever happen. I mean, if you told me this, it's like almost like a dream. It's almost like an episode of Doctor Who. You sort of step into the TARDIS and come into another time. I mean, I can honestly remember vividly my first meeting with Verity in that office, my first step into that studio, and wondering what the heck I was going to be doing with this, and trying to make sense with it, and getting terribly worried, and going home and trying to think about how to make it work, and not sort of end up so that we're all embarrassed by it. And that's what I'm saying. So for me, an achievement is not so much a single moment, it is the overall moment of achievement, because this is an achievement. What else can I say?
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Waris Husein, thank you so much for giving us Doctor Who.
Thank you so much. Thank you.